Okay, you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember David O. to discuss serious issues regarding the city's witness relocation program, or victim relocation program, and we'll have an interview with recently seated Councilmember Ketsi Lozado. Our own Lance Haver will be discussing insurance rates. And, well, Lance, why don't you tell us? I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about the great series that the Inquirer has been running called A More Perfect Union, where they focused on life insurance. And I'm going to put it in a broader perspective and talk about how all insurance has race-based ratings and race-based pricing. And I'm going to give an update on SEPTA, changes to the buses, what's happening, what people can do if they don't want to lose their bus service.
All right. And we're also joined, as always, by Denise Clay Murray. Denise, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. There's a lot to talk about both locally and nationally.
Yeah. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the mayor's race and also about the fact that folks need to start demanding that the parties respect voters a little bit more when it comes to who they put up for election. Because last night in Georgia, we witnessed the end of the single most heinous act of political cruelty I have ever seen in my life.
Absolutely. And we do need to discuss that because it is exactly that, cruelty. But before we get to that, we're going to start a little closer to home. This is an interview Denise and I did earlier this week with Councilmember David O. The interview is a little long, so we're going to play the first half of it tonight and the second half of it next week on the program. So look forward to that. So here is our interview with Councilmember David O. All right, Councilmember O, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on.
So the last couple of weeks, and really for a while now, one of a major concern of yours has been victim relocation.
Yes.
And there was a hearing last month, the joint committee hearing, where the administration came and testified about some funds that had been allocated for this purpose. Before we even get to that, though, can you tell us a little bit about this problem and how you discovered it?
Yes. So this was something I had not come across. I was not familiar with it. I am familiar with crime. I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of crime, lived there my whole life. And I served in the district attorney's office and I've done criminal defense work. So from all sides, I'm familiar with what goes on. But there has always been certain assumptions and understandings, even among some of the most vicious criminal organizations and gangs. Certain things are off limits. It's almost like, if you will, I hate to put it this way, but like a manly code, like a code of, you're not like a despot of some, you're not a cowardly person. Like this is just off limits. You don't attack someone's little children. You don't attack their grandparents or their mother. You know, that's off limits. And so that's kind of an assumption, right? It's almost like it's an insult to your character to do something like that. So we've seen a lot of homicide shootings, especially by young people. We see something where some young man was at a bus stop and two guys run out and shoot him 19 times. It's shocking, right? And the first thought is, okay, somehow he's involved in crime. There must be some reason for this. Without knowing, most people will say, oh, it must have been drugs or something like that. So but we did see a lot of it, and it's certainly a problem. We're trying to understand what is the issue here. So I was contacted by a woman working in the community who was telling me about the problem of mothers being shot at, not once or twice, but shot at continuously, periodically, and them being attacked and their children, like 14 years old, 8 years old, because someone believes that her son cooperated with the police. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not true. And so they can't get to the son, so they're getting to the other children. So I said, listen, I got to go take a look for myself, because, you know, I'm not saying that's not true, but that's a little difficult to understand. So I went to the house, and when I went up the steps, the first thing I saw was a lamppost, a metal lamppost with a bullet hole in it. So I then went up the porch, and there was newspaper and construction paper covering all the windows. I wasn't sure anybody was home. Nobody was answering the door, but finally, through phone calls and whatnot, the person on the phone told the person in the house to open the door. So I went into the house, and I got a tour of the first floor where the windows were broken, signs of forced entry, other types of signs of violence upon the house. And when the a woman who told me about this arrived, they went through their phone, and she's showing me pictures of the resident of the home, the mother, with a bloody lip, black eye, and she's going through each incident of how she was walking down the street, someone drove by, hit her in the back of her head, knocked her out with some kind of metal pipe or pole or something, and where she's been confronted. And it's a very odd thing to hear. And she talked about her children and how they're being harassed and beaten up. So I talked to both children, at the time, 8-year-old boy and 14-year-old girl. The 14-year-old girl was very telling to me. She was not happy I was there. She did not want to talk to me. We had a very kind of, like, I was trying to talk with her, and you know, she was very resentful that I was there. And her answers was that she's fine. She went through the whole thing about she can handle herself. She can take care of herself. And I said, is it a concern, you after school? And she said no, because someone picks her up. And then I asked her, but what happens if that person can't pick you up, like your car breaks down? And she got very quiet and started to cry. That is the ring of truth. That is the truth of what she's going through. She doesn't want to be in that neighborhood. She doesn't want to be in that school. She's got to put on the strong face, but there's tragedy there. And for the boy and for the mom. So I was trying to figure out, like, how can I address this strange situation? Because as a former assistant district attorney, as someone who's been involved in criminal defense work, the district attorney's office and most of law enforcement is built around witness protection. And that typically has meant this, that if I am a witness in an upcoming case, I may need protection. So someone moves me into a motel or a hotel 2 weeks before the trial or a week before the trial. I go testify, trial's over, and I go back home. The idea is I'm safe. The trial is done. Any reason to harass me or threaten me or to scare me off from going to court, that's over. I can go home and I'm safe. There are situations where the person may not be safe, but that usually has something to do with the nature of the organized crime, the crime organization, what message they want to send. But usually that doesn't involve like everyday people. You know, like you're not a member of a rival gang or something like that. You did not betray the code by testifying. You're just a regular person. It doesn't really apply to you. And we're a municipal government. We're not doing Fed cases and things like that. So it generally doesn't come up. So you move someone and they come back home. But they are witnesses in a case. There's a file, there's a case, you know, you go through the whole thing. In this situation, these people are not witnesses. There is no case. And therefore, the money and resources that law enforcement and the district attorney's office has is not really around dealing with people that are being targeted unrelated to a criminal trial, and even unrelated to any real conduct other than they're the mother of someone perceived to be somehow cooperating with law enforcement. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes they're trying to get to somebody. They can't. They go on social media. They see a picture of me. I don't know why I'm in the picture. You know, maybe I was a cousin, maybe a best friend of somebody, maybe just showed up for a birthday party. They see me standing, waiting for a bus, and they run up on me and they shoot me. And this is where we've ended up in this city, that somehow this culture has changed into something like this. So one of the mothers was willing to, and deathly afraid. And one of the reasons is because she had been waiting over a year to be moved. She was somehow promised to be relocated with her children, and that didn't happen for over a year. That's why I was asked to come see what I could do. So having verified that this woman is in actual danger of being killed, and I'll backtrack a second. It's not like someone's going to out and kill her. It's more like they see her and they shoot at her. They drive by the house, they shoot at the house. They might kill her, they might not. It's almost like a game. It's almost like they're playing. And so what happens is I I arranged for her to tell this story to television news reporter and a print newspaper reporter, you know, with the understanding she would disguise her voice and her, you know, her face wouldn't be shown. And she did do that. And the people in the neighborhood had a good idea it was her. And she did understand that risk, but, you know, it was also the fact that we were going to act quickly. So with that news, which is really the impetus of why things were done, it wasn't me and what I said, it was that it came out into the public sphere and people were very concerned and they were very shocked and they very much wanted our city to do something. And so I met with our administration and they said, the mayor agrees, you know, we're going to put $500,000 into the transfer ordinance to fund the relocation of this woman, her children, and the other mothers. And so it was a great relief for me, you know. And
it's
I was
nine
mothers, you know, and
Yeah.
I'll go into a little bit of that, but as what I was aware of, I'm sure there's more and other things like that, but you know, what I then expected was now that this 500,000 is available, and we specifically said we don't want to put it in the district attorney's office because this is not what they do, and they were not able to do it, and they're doing something different, which is very important. But we wanted to put the money someplace. We talked about maybe the sheriff's office, maybe the controller's office. We decided on the managing director's office because there was 2 offices there. One was the Office of Victim Services and the other one's Office of Victim Advocate. And we were told, I was told in reaching out that yes, the MDO's office, managing director's office, can handle this. And from there, actually, I was told they could move them themselves. And that they give money to the district attorney's office. They fund nonprofits that move people, and they are able to do it themselves. So the money went to the managing director's office. And from there, what happened is we had several online meetings, virtual meetings. Council member Curtis Jones Jr. as the chair of public safety, Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson as the chair of a special committee task force on gun violence, myself as the person who introduced this resolution and the impetus of the funds. And we met with the managing director's office, the victims services folks, and with the sheriff and with other people, and putting our heads together, we went through what could be done. And the bottom line was everybody was willing to help out in every which way they could. But we had a follow-up meeting where the question is, well, what's been done? Well, nothing's been done yet. Another meeting, as weeks go by, months go by, what was done? Nothing was done yet. What is the problem? So in one of our conversations, Every Murder is Real, Amir was a participant in that conversation, because they said, we are moving people. We are relocating people. We just need, the funds, and you give us the people and we'll move them. We can do it very quickly. So my understanding from that meeting was this was going to happen. The people in the managing director's office was going to work with Amir, and they were going to move the people that needed to be moved. And when we say move, not to hotel, not to a motel, which, by the way, they use the same hotel and motels all the time, not to PHA housing. They were going to relocate them to a completely different neighborhood. We even talked about a reciprocal relationship with other counties and cities where we'll take two of yours, you take two of ours type situation. We'll fund it, you fund yours. But as time went on, I was getting phone calls that the little 14-year-old girl ran away. She's disappeared. The mother moved to Delaware County. The last phone call I got was that the mother has been arrested and she's incarcerated, awaiting a double homicide. She got a gun because nothing had happened in 2 years. She wanted to protect herself, and she got a gun. That gun, when analyzed, was a link to 2 murders. And so she's in jail, and I don't really know where the children are, but they don't have a mother, they don't have a caretaker. Anyway, we have this hearing. And I introduced a resolution for this hearing in September. Where is the money? Where did it go? What's it being used for? How come it wasn't used for relocating these victims? And when we've had like some phone calls getting ready for the hearing, and there isn't an answer. So we have the hearing and there isn't an answer. The answer is, I don't know. So what I've heard is some of it went to the district attorney's office. All of it went to the district attorney's office. And then in a letter, I was told that all of it went to a nonprofit organization, which does not do relocation. And because the office, both offices in the managing director's office can't do it. Well, that's not what they said. If they said they couldn't do it, we wouldn't have done it that way. And they don't have to do it. And in fact, that's what they're supposed to do. This is why they exist. And so.
And this is the Office of Victim Advocate and Violence Prevention.
Yes. So what I was surprised to see is that in our new transfer ordinance, there was another $500,000 basically the same money to the same MDO for the same reason.
I was on mute, and now I'm back. We'd like to thank Councilmember David O for being with us for the first part of the interview, and we will play the rest of it next week on the program. This is a very important story that we're going to be keeping an eye on. Next, we would like to play for you the interview we did with new council member Ketsi Lozada, representing the 7th Council District. She was sworn in a week ago, and this will be her second week in council, her second meeting tomorrow on Thursday. So here's our interview with Councilmember Ketsi Lozada.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I am a long-term resident, lifelong resident of the 7th Council District. I'm raising my family here. I attended elementary school in the neighborhood at St. Veronica, graduated from Little Flower High School for Girls, and I have my undergrad and grad degrees from Lincoln University. I've always worked in the nonprofit sector, at least early on in my professional career, where I met Councilwoman Sanchez and decided to come to work for city government in 2008 during her first term as her chief of staff. I served as her chief of staff for about 12 years, and my priorities here in the office during my time as her chief of staff were really around organizing the community and making sure that they were educated about the services that government had available for them. After I left Councilwoman Sanchez's office, I went back to work in a nonprofit organization in the Hunting Park community, which is where I was raised as a young person and attending school. Elementary and high school, I worked at Esperanza on the ground at folks' doors, listening to the concerns that they had and how they wanted to improve their quality of life. And then I was presented with the opportunity of coming here, running in the special election and returning in the capacity that I'm in now.
So what made you decide, okay, I've been on a council staff, I've done all these other things. What made you want to be the council person? Because that's I feel like it's kind of like night and day in a way, just based on the conversations we have with staffers and things. What made you want to hold that office?
What made me want to hold the office? I think that really understanding that community voices needed to always be at the forefront of everything that we do as a government. I worked with a team of people, both here during my time in council and at Esperanza, who really understood the importance of community engagement. And oftentimes in that capacity, I heard, I want to be able to make my voice heard more often. I want to be the priority. I want decisions to be made after my voice was heard at the table. And so, understanding both sides of how government works and understanding how the need of community residents made me feel like, because I understand them, I'm the best person for this. And so, Councilwoman Sanchez has always had a 2023 plan since 2007. She knew that in 2023, she wanted to move to the next level. What was never sure was who would replace her. And so when I was presented with that opportunity, I thought, who better than me, who was there, who understands the district, who lives in the district, understands the challenges that community residents who live there experience every day, who better than me to be able to serve in this capacity.
So even though you've had extensive preparation for this role, having worked in city council and having worked on the outside, seeing what the issues are, coming into the role, how do you prepare for it? What do you do to say, okay, I'm going to be as effective as possible as soon as possible?
I think that you're never fully prepared, right? I think that every part of the district has is unique and has a very specific need, but they also have certain little pieces that are the same. And so I think across the board, community residents just want a better quality of life. And in order to be able to start providing them with a better quality of life, you need to have relationships. And that is what I have, right? I have relationships in government offices that will be able to quickly impact and change what is happening on the block. And so I just made it a point to reach out to my contacts and to those partners in city government and talk to them about what some of those challenges are that community residents have continued to voice and asked for their support very early on. And so my preparation was more along the lines of making sure that I reestablished those relationships, that I connected with those partners in government to help them understand what I wanted to do immediately coming in.
And what are your top priorities coming in the office?
Improving the quality of life right now is number one, right? Making sure that blocks are safe to walk on, that they're lit appropriately, that that students in our community have access to quality education, that their structures, the building structure is safe, a safe place for them to come learn in, that the teachers that are in those spaces feel like it is safe for them to come to work, and that they're able to receive the necessary resources to provide that child with a successful academic journey. And then development, right? There's parts of the district in the 7th that are heavily developed, and there are parts that don't have attention. And so ensuring that community residents understand that I am here to ensure that while development is very necessary in the 7th Council District, that it doesn't have to mean that their identity, their culture, and their it is not respected, right? The identity and the history of the culture of the district and of the neighborhood is respected by developers. And so those are 3 of the things that I really want to prioritize from the very start.
So we are often mentioned the poorest big city in America. How do we start to tackle that poverty issue?
I think that the poverty conversation has always been a part of the conversation. It's always been a part of the work. Many in my district suffer from food insecurities. Many in my district suffer from lack of employment. And so generational wealth is not something that you see in the 7th Council District. And so it is a part of every conversation at every table that I sit in when I'm meeting with community stakeholders and residents. And ensuring that when I'm meeting with partners or government entities, that they understand that community's specific needs, right? We need affordable housing in the 7th Council District. That is specific. That is very, very important. Those that are coming to do development in that community to understand who they're building for, and what their economic situation is. Just making sure that I advocate consistently for the residents of the 7th Council District.
Okay, I'd like to bring Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us, Council Member Lozada. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You mentioned that one of the problems that you see with development in the 7th District is that you have some places that are really, really developed and other places that have not been. How do you get developers to kind of go to the places that haven't been developed? And If so, I guess do you apply tax breaks, or how do we do that?
I think that there has to be a conversation. There has to be listening to one another. I think that developers don't know what they don't know, right? So I need to be able to get them to visit the 7th Council District, show them what some of the possibilities are. Actually, right before coming here, I was meeting with someone who talked about, the challenges that some developers have, the requirements that government puts in place in order for them to be able to build affordability like we need it to happen in the 7th Council District. And so I think ensuring that conversations of mutual respect happen, as well as showing them what the possibilities are in other areas of the district.
Okay, now, one of the issues that I'm sure you've probably heard a lot about is the issue with what is happening in Kensington, particularly as it pertains to the opioid crisis. During the early days of the mayor's second term, there was talk about putting a center there that would allow addicts to go and, for want of a better way to put it, shoot up safely. And Councilwoman Quinones Sanchez vehemently opposed that. Are those same people talking to you about that now? And what do you think? I guess what would your response to that be?
I've been involved in the Kensington situation since the very beginning. When we got here in 2008, the underground, the tracks were where they kind of concentrated at. And I was part of the early on conversations about what do we need to do to make sure that those who are suffering from addiction receive the necessary resources, and what do we do about protecting community residents who are exposed to this situation. Safe consumption sites are absolutely necessary. And we need safe consumption sites. We don't need safe consumption or safe injection sites, whichever you prefer to call them. We don't need them to be in the 7th Council District. We have the responsibility to do whatever it is we need to do to break up the concentration in that community as it relates to the epidemic. So yes, those folks have reached out to me. I've been very honest with them about my opposition for a safe injection site in the 7th Council District. I believe that we need multiple safe injection sites, but they should not start in the 7th Council District because that community has been impacted for over 20 years with what is happening there now, and it has consistently gotten worse. I think that government in the future will be responsible for the trauma that has been caused to the children and the families that live in that community. And what do we say to those families 20 years from now when those children can't be successful contributing citizens to our city because of the trauma that they experienced as a result of this epidemic? And so, I think that I have compassion for those who are suffering on our streets. I'm empathetic to them, but I think that we also need to focus a little bit of our attention, more so now than ever, to those who are living there, not necessarily because they have to live there, but because that is their community. That is where they were raised and where they are choosing to raise their families. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're there because they can't go anywhere else. And we shouldn't expect that of them. We shouldn't expect them to be the ones to move. We should expect us as a government to resolve what we've allowed to happen in that community.
Now, have you figured out what committees you're going to be on council, and how do they relate to what it is you hope to achieve in the 7th Councilmanic District?
I have asked about what committees I'm going to serve on. Everyone has asked me the same question. And at this moment, I'm still not sure what committees I will be on. However, I did ask, I was asked for what committees I was interested in. Naturally, I'd like to be in the Public Health Committee because of what is happening in Kensington. I'd like to be in the Public Safety Committee for the same reason. And not only the public safety, not only because of Kensington, because I think crime is affecting all of our city, but I have a very good relationship with many in the public safety world. And so I'd like to sit on committees where I would be able to have an impact because I understand what is happening in my district as it relates to crime. And education, right? I want to make sure that, like I said, if I am able to advocate and make those schools in my district better, I want to be able to do that at the committee level.
Okay. Now, what is it about your district that you think us as reporters get wrong? Because sure, we come and we cover the opioid crisis there, and we cover some things related to crime, but what is it about the 7th Councilmanic District that you think we get wrong, and how can we correct it?
I think oftentimes we tend to focus on all the negatives that is happening in the 7th Council District. The 7th Council District has commercial corridors that are made up of owner-operators. They're business people from all walks of life, from every culture and every community, from different backgrounds, and they really change and impact positively those communities. I think that we don't talk enough about those small businesses who get up every day and who contribute economically to that neighborhood. In the Kensington community, I think we oftentimes focus on the person who, or the people who are suffering from addiction, as opposed to all of the great people that live there, who have lived there for generations, and who regardless of what is happening around them, they get up every day and they're good neighbors, and they're caring neighbors. You know, the block captains, the faith-based leaders, all who are always present in that community, who always want to bring cheer and support to that community. I think that oftentimes we don't report on those things. Many of our kids, even though they live within a walking distance of all of that is happening there, they end up to be very successful. They go on to higher education. We don't talk about those things often enough. And so I'd like to see more of that.
Okay, thank you. We're going back to my co-host, Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM.
All right, well, thank you very much, Denise. Council member, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we would like to thank Councilmember Ketsi Lozada for joining us, and hopefully that's the first of many times the council members with us. Now, what I'd like to do, Lance, you had some information you'd like to share with us.
Well, I'd like to give a brief update on SEPTA, what they call their bus revolution, which is really how they're going to change all their bus routes, that they're going to limit the buses, how they're going to increase the wait times, they're going to change routes. There was a very large meeting in Roxborough, Mattiunk last night. Over 300 people showed up to protest. The meeting, so many people came that there were 100 people waiting out in the rain for more than an hour to get in. The ward leader there, Lou Ager, got SEPTA to promise that they were going to redo the recommendations and they were going to meet with the neighborhood groups and come up with some new ideas. But that's only for Roxborough and Mattiunk. There was no discussion about other parts of the city. And there is going to be another meeting tomorrow night at 5:30 at SEPTA's headquarters, which is 1234 Market Street. That's 5:30 tomorrow night, 1234 Market Street on the 3rd floor. And anybody who has some concerns about how long they're going to have to wait for a bus, or how many transfers they're going to have to make, or whether they're going to be forced onto the Broad Street line, should come to the meeting and make their voice heard. I'm hoping I will see you there. I'll be there to video it for us for the following week. So if you do come, make sure you stop and say hi to me. And we'll have a full presentation the following week on what routes are being cut, what routes are being changed, and what routes are going to remain the same. But tonight I wanted to also focus on a great article that was in the Philadelphia Inquirer from their series called A More Perfect Union, which examines systemic racism. And if we can pull up the slides now, please, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So this was a great article about life insurance and how people of color, African Americans, end up paying much more for life insurance since the days where people were enslaved. And it's a great story. It's a great article. It's a great investigative report. And the story is called Paying a Premium. And life insurance, as the article points out, is a staple of American life. It is a way for people to pay for their final expenses. It's a way for people to create intergenerational wealth. It's a way for people to ensure that they have enough after their lives are over. But that has not been the case for the African American population. They have been overcharged for life insurance. They have been denied life insurance, and they have not gotten the benefits that the rest of the communities have gotten. So there's no disagreement that racism had been a major part of life insurance rates. Back in 1875, companies like Prudential Insurance were selling low-cost policies known as industrial life insurance to both white and black workers. But the substandard policies, the ones that paid less, were sold predominantly to the black communities and were sold as burial insurance. And anyone who watches television knows that there is still a significant portion of the life insurance market that is sold as final expenses, which means burial insurance. And that remains among the highest priced life insurance. Now, it's not just marketed to people of color any longer, but it is something that is significant. The life insurance companies themselves acknowledge this. They acknowledge that in the past that they discriminated, that they refused to sell policies to people of colors. And they say there's, quote, there's no two ways about it. It's terrible. It hasn't ended. It didn't end with slavery. It didn't end with Jim Crow, and it still has its legacies left today. Part of the reason why we see such a difference in intergenerational wealth between white families and African American families is redlining in mortgages, is jobs discrimination, but it's also in life insurance. So in the 19th century, in the 1800s, life insurance companies found ways to discriminate by simply not having agents in neighborhoods where there was a predominant African American community, or selling those substandard policies. We can ask, realistically, is the discrimination over? In the 1950s and 60s, with organized labor leading the fight to end the racist practices, most of the life insurance companies started to investigate on their own, and they started to acknowledge the past hurt and harm. There were 16 cases settled in 2000 and 2004, covering 14.8 million policies sold by 900 companies, adding up to more than $556 million in settlements. So as late as 2004, we were seeing life insurance companies acknowledging the past harm and settling cases. You would think that that would be the end of it, but in 2020, the Haven Life Insurance Company did a survey and found evidence that there are racial gaps in coverage. And what that means is that African Americans tend to have more policies, but those policies are of smaller amounts and have higher premiums. And while it sounds great, those commercials we see on television, often that's the most expensive form of insurance that you can buy. And many people would do far better by prepaying for their final expenses than they would by buying those life insurance policies. And there are many people who, if they were to sit down with a financial planner, if they're privileged enough to be in that position to be able to put some money aside, who would do far better investing the money at age 40 or at age 50 rather than buying life insurance for final expenses at age 60. What I thought the article didn't mention, and what I thought it could mention, was it's not just life insurance where the African American community has been discriminated against and forced to pay more. It's now over a half century since most of the civil rights legislation was passed. But surprisingly, what we've seen from study after study is that African Americans pay more than white Americans for car insurance, which is required by law. And the last study happened in 2015. And as we've gotten more sophisticated with our abilities to what's called, quote unquote, mine data, to do studies, what we found is it was relatively easy to ask the question, are people of color paying more for car insurance than other communities? And so the study was very simple. It took two people, same income, same credit score, same car, same driving records, had them get insurance quotes and had them get insurance quotes in different neighborhoods. And so what we saw was neighborhoods that were predominantly African American paid significantly more, on average $438 a year more for car insurance than people in primarily white zip codes. Now, again, this is a study, so we were able to control for all the variables. Same car, same driving record, same income, same credit score. The only difference was where someone lives. And that continues as of 2017. Consumer Reports in ProPublica, which is a public interest reporting service, found that in Illinois, California, Missouri, and Texas, premiums are still higher in minority neighborhoods than in general, not just in primarily Black neighborhoods. So it's not just African Americans, it's all minorities that are being impacted by this. And it's homeowners insurance as well. Now, this is from the Urban Institute, which studies the effects on African American communities. And it says recent studies have shown that compared to homeowners in predominantly white occupied neighborhoods, homeowners in minority neighborhoods are less likely to have private home insurance, are more likely to have policies that provide less coverage in case of a loss, and are likely to pay more for similar policies. The insurance companies have found a way to do this without saying we're not going to sell it to African Americans, or we're going to charge African Americans more. Things like this. An insurance company refuses to sell homeowners insurance to any house that has a flat roof, or refuses to sell insurance to any house that has a vacant house on the block, or refuses to sell homeowners insurance to anyone who's had a prior claim in the last 5 years. So there are ways around saying we're not going to sell it to African Americans that has the impact on African Americans. And so in 2020, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, which is the group of all the insurance commissioners across the nation, had a meeting which showed that the underwriting guidelines for home insurance were based on age and value, which regulators, not a surprise here, but apparently a surprise to those in power, which regulators discovered was a proxy for race, given past discrimination in neighborhoods where these homes were located. So, for example, if you redline, if you overcharge people of color for mortgages, then there's a good chance that those neighborhoods are not going to have the same value as other neighborhoods. And the insurance companies have found a way to discriminate based on the price of the house. There are types of insurance that would give you coverage for everything. So if you have a loss, you would get replacement insurance rather than market insurance. If you have a loss and your television is damaged and you have replacement insurance, you get enough money to replace the television. But in some neighborhoods, you can't buy replacement insurance and you get market value. Well, a television that's 7 years old has almost no value. So the television, you'll get $50 for it, even if it costs $1,000 to replace it. Well, if that house was in a different neighborhood and had replacement insurance, you would get the full $1,000. As bad as that is, it turns out that according to the New York Times, it's not just the pricing of the policies, it's not just the limitations on the policies, but it's harder for Black families to actually collect after a loss. Now, the New York Times says Black policyholders suspect discrimination as they deal with insurers, but it's impossible to prove because the insurance keep a lid on the data. So I'm going to pull that down. the way the insurance industry is regulated is by state, and insurance companies claim that their information is proprietary and they will not release it. So it's very hard to prove some of these things because the state insurance commissioners refused to study it. They refused to look at it. And in Pennsylvania, we have a state insurance commissioner that has never investigated the effect of racism on the ratings of car insurance, which is mandatory by law, homeowners insurance, which is required if you want to get a mortgage, or life insurance, which, while not needed, not required, not by law, is something that many families have used as a way of creating intergenerational wealth. It will be interesting to see whoever replaces Governor-elect Shapiro as the Attorney General. If these studies showing that there's a discrimination based on race when it comes to insurance pricing, whether they'll do the investigations necessary to make sure that it's a level playing field and that we have some economic justice and we do away with racial redlining discrimination when it comes to insurance rates.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for that report. And there's going to be a lot more coming with that, obviously, in the coming, well, soon, right? After the gets sworn in, and then when we find out what's happening at the state level.
Once the new Attorney General is sworn in, we'll have a call into him or her, and we will ask the question, are you planning to investigate racial profiling for insurance rates?
Well, thank you very much.
Now, the question I have with that is, since it's obviously racially based, what about, has gentrification impacted this at all?
As of yet, the answer is not as much as what it could. The gentrification affects the part of premiums that are based on housing prices, but it hasn't changed what insurance companies use to price, and it also hasn't changed where the agents are located and which companies decide to sell in Philadelphia or not. So if you looked at the pricing of different insurance companies when it comes to homeowners insurance or car insurance, each one has their own proprietary information of how they set rates. They also are allowed to decide how many agents they're going to use and where their agents' headquarters are going to be. So you may find an insurance company that will have a tremendous number of agents in the suburbs and many fewer agents in the inner city. And that company may offer the best prices. So if there's no local agent, it's much harder for people to find. When you call to get a quote, there's no law that requires the insurance agent to return the phone call. And those are all ways that we know have a direct impact that are not resolved yet by gentrification, by the changing of the neighborhoods. Over the next 20 years, that may be the case, but there's nothing to suspect that they just won't shift around. So, for example, the town of Yaden, which is somewhat struggling right now, if it continues to struggle economically, there's no reason to suspect that insurance companies won't move their agents out of Yaden and move them into Center City or South Philadelphia or Fishtown or Northern Liberties. So there's a great amount of latitude of where the companies can have their agents, where they can focus their advertising, and where they can try and find clients. And to a certain extent, that will direct who gets insurance at the best rates and who doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Denise, we had an election yesterday.
Don't remind me.
Opinions about that.
Well, last night, the midterms finally came to an end with the Georgia runoff, where Raphael Warnock, the current senator in Georgia, who's also the reverend of the church that Dr. Martin Luther King preached at before he was shot. He was competing against Herschel Walker, a former, who I didn't know until, this was a former Eagle. I thought he was just, I knew he played for the Cowboys and in the USFL, but he used to be an Eagle. And he was running for Senate in what I can only describe as the single most heinous act of political cruelty I have ever seen in my entire life. And I've been covering politics for 30 years. It's just, and the thing that still kind of makes me scratch my head really hard about this is the fact that in the end, it was still so close. Warnock only beat Herschel Walker by 3 percentage points. And what that should say that should say a couple of things to all of us. One, that the New South and the Old South aren't quite as different as we all want to think, because a Herschel Walker in the Old South got as many votes as someone who wouldn't totally be an embarrassment to the state of Georgia in the Senate last night. And then on top of that, you have the whole, there's just no respect for voters. And the Republican Party is still so indebted to Donald Trump that they let him say, hey, let's put this totally wrong for the job person on the ballot and see what happens. And, that could have gone really, really badly. If Georgia's voters, and this was another thing that I noticed about this, Georgia's voters and even people from around the country focused on organizing to get the vote out for Reverend Warnock in this election. And because of that, for the first time in a very long time, the president in office did not lose any members of the Senate from his party. And now the Democrats have 51 votes instead of just 50, which means Vice President Kamala Harris won't be asked to break ties as often. And it also means that Democrats can put all Democrats in charge of the committees in the Senate. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of that shakes out. But we also need to pay attention as an electorate to the fact that the Republicans have pretty much let you know they have no respect for you as a voter. And they did it by putting Herschel Walker on the ballot. You could have run a Tickle Me Elmo doll for that seat, and it would have been less embarrassing than a man who was basically talking about vampires and werewolves and which one he would rather be. So it was, I was just fascinated by the whole thing.
It was kind of a surreal situation, and it's strange to use that word after what we've seen since like 2015. This is something that really stood out to me as a very strange kind of thing. Something else, I just have to mention this. I was watching the coverage last night, and there's still a county in Georgia called Jefferson Davis County, and I just want to mention that because I was stunned by it. But yeah, it's a really strange thing. In the end, Reverend Warnock pulled it out. But you're not surprised it was as close as it was, are you, Denise?
No, because there's a Jefferson Davis County in Georgia. And the New South and the Old South aren't really all that far apart, especially when the topic is white supremacy. What if you saw any of the interviews that Herschel Walker did leading up to the runoff, he was usually accompanied by Senators Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, who were basically acting as buffers between him and any questions that anybody could have asked. And the thing is, they were looking less for an actual senator representing the citizens of Georgia than they were someone that they could control. And it was obvious to anyone who was observing.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. because we're just about out of time, but we will be back next week with the second half of our interview with Councilmember David O and more Hall Monitor. Thank you for being with us.